Dr. Schneider.
Hello.
Hi, what a pleasure to meet you. It's wonderful to be here in a monastic setting. I'm trying to get a picture of what life was like around the time of Gutenberg, how books were produced in the scriptoria, I think they're called. Well, this is a rather fine room. This is, in fact, the chapter house where they would read the chapters of the Bible and they'd all sit round on the benches. So, a scriptorium presumably was a different kind of room to this.
Yes.
What sort of thing would you expect to find in a scribe's room?
Scriptoriums were smaller rooms than this because they needed heat in these rooms, and because you need warm fingers to write and to hold the feather and to do all this fine work with your hands. And they needed light. They needed windows in the summer, and in the winter they needed candles.
Candles. Do we have any idea of the character and personality of some of these scribes?
Very seldom. Sometimes we have at the end of such Bibles or other manuscripts small texts where the scribes tell how hard their work were.
Oh really? They leave a little record?
It was very cold. They had to sit always in the same position, and they get
cramps and stiffness.
And it was cold and it was dark and their eyes were tired.
And they write this down?
Yes.
Hand-copied Bibles were rare and expensive commodities far beyond the reach of ordinary mortals, and even the best scribes made mistakes. A printing machine would allow the creation of exact copies, and lots of them. Whilst some church leaders feared anything that might break their near monopoly on learning, others recognized that a common and universally accepted version of the Bible might be a powerful weapon in the battle to preserve Christian unity. But the church was just one potential market for printed books. Beyond the cloister, new universities were springing up across Europe.
So it's tempting to assume that Gutenberg, aside from his technical interest, also saw an entrepreneurial.
It was a mixture of three things, I think. He was an engineer about the technical things. He was a merchant, and he was an intellectual. He had studied and at a university, and he knew that many people needed books.
With demand for books growing all the time, anyone who could devise a machine for making them could hope to make a fortune. And growing up in the heartland of the German wine industry, Gutenberg didn't have far to look for inspiration.
These are rather noble structures, and I think if poor old Alan back in England is trying to build a press, he's going to find it rather useful to see what these originals were like.
These contraptions are wine presses. Alan May thinks that Gutenberg's press evolved from machines like these.
Oh, that's very artistic. Very good. Yes, for Gutenberg, these must have been a very common sight. He grew up in an area, one of the biggest wine-growing areas of the world. I wonder if there was an actual moment, though, when he was sitting next to one of these or watching some grapes being pressed and saw the spindle sending the thing down and thought, that's what I need. Just this, big frame with a spindle.
Presses like these may have started Gutenberg's creative juices running, but to turn such a basic piece of engineering into a precision machine would be a tall order. And that was only part of the challenge he faced. The whole project would take years of experiment, and it would cost a fortune. But money didn't grow on trees in 15th century Mainz.
I think it was a city of past glory. It had been very influential and very rich in the medieval times. But then in the 14th century, it came down a little bit. The plague was there 2 times, and the Black Death, yes, and the city didn't have the richness anymore. But it had been politically very influential. The Archbishop had been the elector and was the primus inter pares, as we might say, of the electors. And so it was an important city in any case.
In a sense, what I'm getting from you is that Mainz was a city of the past, and what Gutenberg needed was a city that looked to the future.
Yes, I think so.
For a budding entrepreneur like Gutenberg, Mainz was no place to start a business. He would have been in his early 30s when he packed his bags and set sail down the Rhine. 2 days to the south was the city where his experiments in printing would first begin. At Alan May's workshop in England, our own printing experiments already in full swing. Alan's invited his fellow printing expert Martin Andrews along to show him work in progress. I'm pleased to see that my holiday snaps turned up. Alan's also finished carving this hefty wooden thread which generates the pressure needed to print. But the thread needs a counter thread to guide it on its downward journey, and it has to be cut by hand into the head of the press. Sounds tricky to me, but Alan has a plan.
It's an amazing contraption, Alan.
I mean, the idea came from a guy called Hero of Alexander in something like AD 64.
This ingenious device uses these wooden pegs to guide the thread on its journey. Meanwhile, a set of cutters at the other end carve the counter thread through this solid wooden block.
I'm careful to tap this not on the sharp edge.
So you're in fact using the real thread itself to cut its equivalent part.
That's it, that's the elegant part of it.
Actually, it's pushed loads and loads of sawdust ahead of it, look.
It's cutting something, but there's only one way to find out if the thread and the counter thread are a perfect match.
Ah, that changes the whole perspective, doesn't it? As soon as you take that out, one can see how it's all working. Oh my goodness, there she goes. Excellent. Well, I think that's a pretty good job, isn't it?
I do.
And I've never seen anything quite like it. So, I mean, I'm convinced. I think it works.
I'm convinced too, but there's clearly a bit more to do.
I'm following the Gutenberg Trail down the Rhine from Mainz to Strasbourg. When Gutenberg arrived here in the early 1430s, this was a bustling city with trading links across Europe and beyond. That made it a far more promising business base than the bankrupt city of his birth. And towering above the commercial centre was the great cathedral itself.
Of course, when Gutenberg got here, the cathedral hadn't been finished and this huge tower and spire weren't quite completed. And as you can see, there's still some work going on to this very day. It's worth thinking about the fact that at this time, the only investments that human beings ever seemed to make were really in their future, in other words, in the afterlife. By participating in the building of these enormous structures, they were assuring their place in heaven. But around about the time of Gutenberg, we started to see the rise of a merchant class who really believed in investing in the idea of their future on Earth. Venture capitalists, and such people were to prove very useful to Gutenberg.
The cathedral was more than the spiritual heart of the city. It also became a focal point for its dealmakers and moneymen, prototype capitalists with the cash Gutenberg needed to fund his work. By the late 1430s, he'd struck up a partnership with 3 of them and was ready to start work in earnest. And if he ever wanted to remind himself that his big idea was a good one, he only had to take a stroll through the streets nearby.
Rue des Frères, the street of the brothers, that tells us something about this area. We're right beside the cathedral, which is the ecclesiastical heart of an ecclesiastical city, at the heart of an ecclesiastical empire, the Holy Roman Empire. Perhaps worth thinking of it in terms of something like the City of London, in other words, the centre of the entire system that runs the world at the moment. For us, it's finance. For them, it was the church. It was the church that generated all the paperwork, all the legal documentation, all the printed services, everything in fact that Gutenberg might have spotted needed reproduction, needed a new technology. And so we turned into this, frankly less than prepossessing street, but note the title, Rue des Écrivains, Street of the Writers, Schrijversstuggasse. It's in this street in Strasbourg that Gutenberg must have seen the scribes bustling around self-importantly with great sheaves of paper under their arms and calluses on their inky fingers. And he must have thought, well, you may believe you've got a job for life, but I know better. Because one day you're all going to be replaced by a vulgar machine.
He employed a carpenter called Sazpach to work on his new invention. No one knows what it looked like, so Alan Mays pieced together other clues to design our machine. He knows that Gutenberg printed one page at a time, whereas later presses printed two in quick succession. Maybe that's why this prototype looks rather unusual to an expert eye.
Let me have a quick look and see what's actually going on here, because it is unconventional. Because the first thing that surprises me is that we've got all the weight in the framework here, and normally on a two-pull press you'd have actually a framework out here, which is making this more rigid, but also taking the weight of the stone and the gear.
Oh, don't need that now. Look, don't need it.
Because you only need to go that far.
It never has to go farther than that. When the press is in use, it never has to go beyond the cheeks.
It is unconventional.
It may be unorthodox, but Alan thinks he's found support for his design in an unlikely source. This illustration of a press was drawn by Albrecht Dürer 60 years after Gutenberg first printed.
It's the only drawing that I know of where the feet of the press come forward from the cheeks. That's what mine are doing, look. And this has got a substantial structure at the front.
Which you have, yeah.
Which the common press never has. It just has a little
leg.
Little leg, okay? So I'm wondering whether this is an obsolete press that Dürer's got hold of, and we're looking at a product which is actually 50 years old.
Perfectly prepared to be broad-minded. Whether the other authorities in the world will agree with you, I don't know. But
if Alan's right, this is a major discovery. Could this be a snapshot of an early Gutenberg press?